Chapter 10. Blaine. Blaine took a deep breath as he parked in front of the Home Depot. He should never have suggested this. He'd let himself get caught up in the moment with Kenzi last night. He'd held her hand and let himself think about the way she smelled and how soft her skin was. He'd let himself believe that maybe he could have a relationship. And then that dream had been shattered when he'd heard the name, Kevin. The sound of his brother's name from the young boy's lips had drawn him back to the past faster than a bullet train. The two boys had come around the bend, and Blaine knew they had to be brothers. They looked so much like he and his own brother had at that age. As he'd watched them, he'd seen, for just a moment, a similar time from his past. A time when he'd wanted to run through the forest and his brother had been afraid and hung back. He'd goaded his brother in much the same way as those boys last night. And that memory had reminded him again of his failure as a protector. He hadn't protected his brother then, and he couldn't protect Kenzi or anyone else now. He took another deep breath, dreading this meeting, dreading seeing the worry and confusion on her face like he had last night. Unfortunately, he had already issued the invitation before the painful reminder came, and now he had to follow through. Bailing on her would be rude, and he couldn't bring himself to do it. He would just have to keep his distance and remain strictly professional with her. But that was easier said than done. He really liked her. It had felt good holding her hand last night, so good that for a time he had forgotten he couldn't have that for real. He could pretend for a night, maybe even two. Heck, he was used to that. But she deserved more. She deserved someone who could always be there for her, and that just wasn't him. He locked the Mustang and headed toward the front entrance. Kenzi was there already, her long, dark locks piled on her head. Her top hung crooked, baring one shoulder completely, and her tight jeans showed off her toned legs. This was going to be harder than he thought. Her lips split in a wide smile when she recognized him. "You made it!" He nodded, wondering if he could feign illness to get out of having dinner with her. It wasn't that he didn't want to have dinner with her. He just didn't trust himself to have dinner with her again. She had a way of getting him to lower his walls, and he needed to keep them firmly in place. Her smile faltered a little, as if she'd expected a different greeting, but she kept her composure. "Shall we then?" He followed her inside and tried not to think about the disappointment that had flashed across her face momentarily. It was better this way, and if he could just keep himself from flirting with her, then maybe they could go back to the way it was, before he asked her out, before he held her hand, before he felt his heart thaw in his chest. "So, where do we start?" He was careful to keep his eyes focused on anything except her face as he spoke. If he looked in those eyes for too long, his resolve would fade, and he couldn't let that happen. She flipped open the notebook she'd been carrying under her arm. "Well, I thought we'd start with the oven and the fridge. They're the biggest purchases by far. Then we can look at vanities and paint." "Okay, lead the way." Blaine was careful to let her stay just a bit ahead of him to minimize the chance of them locking gazes. Still, he couldn't help but think about what it would be like to shop with her like a real couple. Would she take charge like she was now, or would she defer to him and let him help make decisions? "Based on your space, I've already narrowed down the options. I tend to think stainless steel will look the best, but I believe they also carry ones in cream or black that would fit your space." Black. He couldn't imagine a black fridge, and cream sounded like it would show dirt easily. He didn't know who might be buying the cabin, but if they had kids, anything like him and his brother when they were younger, they would probably appreciate the stainless steel. He smiled slightly as the memory of peanut butter handprints on the fridge and cabinet doors flew to his mind. "Blaine! Kevin! What is going on here?" Their mother stood in the kitchen doorway, hands on her hips and fire flying from her eyes. "We wanted to make peanut butter toast," Blaine said. "On the cabinets?" She threw her hands up in exasperation. "Did you have to touch every surface?" She reached on top of the fridge for a tub of wipes. "I'll be cleaning this for hours." "Sorry, Mom," Kevin said. His big brown eyes filled with tears, and Blaine knew they were going to rocket down his cheeks any minute. Kevin was definitely the more emotional of the two of them. Their mother sighed. It's okay, Kevin. Why don't you boys go out and play while I clean this up and get dinner started? Sure, Mom. Blaine, having finished his toast, wrapped his arm around his little brother and headed for the back door. But stay away from the lake, she called after them as they exited the cabin. Blaine squeezed his eyes shut to push away the painful memory. That had been one of their last summers spent at the cabin. I think I agree with you on the stainless steel. She turned his direction faster than he could shift his gaze, and her eyes caught his. Darn it, he was trapped now. Great, stainless steel it is. Do you think the same for the oven? He wanted to look away, but there was something in her stare that held him like a tractor beam. What was it? As he looked into her eyes, he suddenly knew. Questions and self-doubt swam in there beneath her confident bravado, and he found his wall lowering again. He wondered what had happened to her to make her second-guess herself so much. Yeah, I think whatever you think will be amazing. Her lips pulled into a tight line, and tiny lines erupted on her forehead as her brows pulled together. What's going on with you, Blaine? What do you mean? I mean, last night you were all smiles and laughter and hand-holding. You agreed to come only if we could have another dinner afterward. But now you're acting as if you'd rather be anywhere else. If you've changed your mind about having me decorate the cabin... No. He grabbed her arm to stop her derailment. He couldn't let her doubt herself. The touch of his fingers stopped her voice, but it also sent pulsing waves up his arm. It's not that at all, Kenzi. You know how you asked me why I've never had a relationship? She nodded, but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. Well, the reason I haven't is because I can't. Her face furrowed in confusion. What do you mean you can't? I mean, physically I can, I guess, but... He sighed. This wasn't coming out right at all. Something happened in my past that keeps me from connecting emotionally. Does that make sense? He hoped she wouldn't ask what, because he wouldn't go into details. Couldn't go into details. They were too painful, and they needed to stay locked away in his mind. A little, I guess. Something happened that made you think you don't deserve a relationship? Yes, she understood. Relief flooded him, and he grabbed her other arm. Exactly. Her eyes softened, and compassion filled her face. Blaine, you deserve happiness. I don't know what's in your past, but it's the past. It doesn't have to define your future. There are things in my past as well, but God forgave me of all of them when I gave my heart to Him. He will do the same for you. Her mention of God caught him slightly off guard. He supposed he should have guessed she was a believer. After all, Shelby and Tucker were, but he still wasn't used to people speaking so frankly about God. No one in his family had mentioned God since the accident, and he wasn't sure God would forgive him for what he'd done. You might be right. I do feel differently around you, but I don't know if I'm ready. Okay, let's just get to work then. She slipped her arms out of his hold and turned toward the ovens. Wait, Kenzi. She stopped and turned to him. I'd like to try, though. She frowned softly. You'd like to try what? All the feelings of guilt and outrage at himself flooded him. He probably couldn't do it. He would have to acknowledge and own up to his mistakes first, and he didn't know if he was strong enough to do that. It was easy enough to pretend he was a relatively good person with a past, but opening himself up to let people see how truly horrible he was? That took courage he didn't have. Not now. Not yet. I'd like to try to be honest and forgive myself, to give it to God and let go. He looked into her eyes as she stood there frowning. He picked up her hand. If you can be patient with me, then I'd like to try. And if I can't, then you're better off without me anyway. I like you. I like being around you. Her eyes searched his, and he willed her to say something. Anything. Finally, her mouth opened. I like you too, Blaine. If you can be honest with me, then I'd love to try too. Kenzi. Kenzi smiled as Blaine laced his hand through hers. She had thought he was going to break things off before they even really got started, but then he'd said he'd wanted to try a relationship. With her. On one hand, she was delighted and astonished. She'd had a crush on Blaine for years, and he was willing to take a chance with her. But on the other hand, she was terrified. He hadn't had a real relationship ever from the sounds of it, and she wasn't sure she wanted to be the guinea pig. Of course, her track record wasn't much better. After her last serious boyfriend wasn't there when she needed him, she hadn't dated anyone seriously either. It hit her then that his situation might be similar, and she should give him the benefit of the doubt. So, ovens? Huh? She looked over to see him grinning at her, and that's when she realized she had been standing in the middle of the aisle, holding his hand, but not moving, probably looking like a dazed and confused moron. Yes, ovens. Every kitchen needs an oven. She turned that direction and tried to focus on the task at hand, but the warmth of his skin against hers kept pulling her mind off track. Or a barbecue grill. This is Texas, after all. Kenzi shook her head and nudged him with her shoulder. You can't have a barbecue grill in a house, especially not that cabin. The whole thing would go up in smoke. His lips split in a wide smile, a natural smile, the first natural smile she'd seen on him. I didn't mean in the house, just on the property. If I have a grill, I don't really need a stove. Ew, what about breakfast? Kenzi loved barbecue as much as the next Texan, but there was a time to grill and there was a time to bake. A grill couldn't make all of the foods in her dietary rotation. Steak and eggs. Eggs on a grill? That not only sounded disgusting, but how in the world did he keep them from falling through the cracks? Yep, a little tinfoil and you're good to go. Tinfoil? She shuddered at the thought of the flavor of eggs cooked in tinfoil. Remind me not to let you make breakfast. The words died in her throat as she realized the innuendo she had just thrown down without meaning to. Great. Now what did she say? She glanced at him, but he seemed unsure of how to respond as well. Anyway, your cabin needs a stove. We're pretty tight on space, so I really just need to know if you want a flat top or the traditional kind. I'm not sure I have a preference, so I'll let you decide. Kenzi nodded and picked out the oven she had been eyeing online. I think this one will go well with the plans I have for the kitchen. Okay, fridge and oven down. Now we just need a vanity and paint. For the bathroom? Confusion threaded his voice, but she couldn't blame him. The bathroom was tiny, and fitting a vanity in there would be a squeeze. Yes, the vanity is for the bathroom. A woman is going to want some counter space and a drawer or two underneath to store necessities. We just need something thin enough to fit the small area. His eyes betrayed his doubt, but he motioned for her to lead the way. The bathroom vanities left a lot to be desired, and after measuring all of the ones that looked small enough, Kenzi sighed. None of these will work. I may have to hire a carpenter. Maybe I could help with that. She tilted her head as she regarded him. Are you a carpenter too? I am a jack of a lot of trades, but yes, carpentry is one of them. Kenzi shook her head in surprise. There was definitely more to Blaine than he let on, but she supposed she could see him as a carpenter. He had the rugged build of someone who worked with their hands, and she had felt a rough patch or two when they were holding hands. Okay, I may take you up on that. Great. So, paint? Yes, paint. I don't want to do much to the living room due to the exposed wood, but the bedrooms could use some paint. Paint it is, then, he said, leading the way to the colorful aisle. Kenzi perused the many colors, finally deciding on a dusty tan and a pale blue. The tan would be for the master bedroom, and she would bring in the blues with pillows and bedding. The upstairs rooms would be the opposites, blue walls and tan accessories. Okay, we have a fridge, an oven, and paint. What's the next step in the decorating process? She placed a finger to her lips as she thought. She did want to discuss the carpet with him, but was now the right time? What? I can tell something is on your mind. I was hoping maybe we could talk about ripping out the carpet and putting hardwood floors in. It would really add charm to the place. Not that it isn't charming, she added quickly. He smiled and shook his head. Don't worry, I get it. The carpet is old and looks worn. In fact, in some places it is worn. She tilted her head at him and waited for him to elaborate. I happen to know there is a small burn in the carpet of one of the rooms upstairs from a reading lamp. A reading lamp? How does that cause a hole in the carpet? Blaine scratched at his chin and averted his eyes. Well, if the lamp has an adjustable neck, and it's a little old so it doesn't always stay up, and if a boy fell asleep while reading it, it might be possible for the lamp to fold, and the light bulb to heat the carpet enough to burn a hole in it. He turned a sheepish gaze on her and shrugged his shoulders. Kenzi bit the inside of her lip to keep from laughing at the visual. I wouldn't have taken you for such an avid reader, Blaine Hollis. Well, when it's nighttime in a cabin with no TV or video games, books have their appeal. She batted his arm playfully. Books always have appeal. Okay, so hardwood floors are a go. I'm glad because they're so versatile. Plus, we can get a few ornate rugs because I'm sure the floor gets cold in the winter. The muscles in his face tensed slightly, but then his smile reappeared. It certainly does. So let's get some hardwood. Kenzi was surprised that Blaine had agreed so easily. True, she was the designer, but she always thought clients would be opinionated about aspects and push back. Blaine seemed to be completely the opposite. Whether that was because he had the money and therefore wasn't worried about the price, or because his desire to sell the cabin was so strong, she wasn't sure. However, the more she interacted with him, the more certain she became that something had happened at that cabin in his past. With the hardwood picked and ordered, Kenzi led the way to the front of the store to check out. Okay, so now we need to check out and set up a delivery time for what we have here. And then I'll need to get out there and remove the current appliances and furniture so we can do the floors and then move the new appliances in. Then I'll work on the colors, pillows, bedding, and the like. A grimace crossed his handsome features. I'm not sure I'll be much help with colors. I'm color deficient. Color deficient? Like you can see some colors but not all of them? He nodded. I wanted to join the Air Force and become a pilot when I graduated. But one day they did one of those color blindness tests in school. Turns out I can't distinguish between some shades of brown and green, so flying was out. But you can still play football? If he had issues with browns and greens, she wondered if he ever had issues with the ball and the turf. He chuckled, and his eyes twinkled as he regarded her. Notice that I only throw the ball, though. I don't catch it. Her eyes widened. So you would have issues if you had to catch it? His laugh deepened, and she didn't think she'd ever heard a sweeter sound. There was a low rumble to it that reminded her of s'mores and warm campfires. Not like you think. I can tell the difference between the ball and the ground. But if I were a wide receiver, I might have issues seeing the ball as it flew through the air. Oh. She felt stupid, though it wasn't like she had any experience being color deficient or playing football. She was a sideline cheerleader only. He placed a finger under her chin to lift it in order to get her attention again. Don't worry, you aren't the first person to ask me what it's like. I think I've heard every question by now. His eyes were like a magnet, drawing her to him and making it impossible to look away. They say eyes are the windows to the soul, but Kenzi couldn't decipher what she saw in his eyes. Desire? Fear? Joviality? Anxiety? It was like for every positive emotion she saw, a negative one existed as well. What had happened to him in his past? His lips parted, and for just a second, Kenzi thought he was going to kiss her right there in the middle of the store. Instead, he dropped his hand and leaned back. Shall we check out and grab that dinner then? Kenzi swallowed the disappointment flooding her body and forced a smile across her lips. That sounds nice.